Human, all too human. Section 9. Man alone with himself. 483. Enemies of truth. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. 484. Topsy-turvy world. We criticize a thinker more sharply when he proposes a tenet that is disagreeable to us, and yet it would be more reasonable to do this when we find his tenet agreeable. 485. A person of character. It is much more common for a person to appear to have character because he always acts in accord with his temperament, rather than because he always acts in accord with his principles. 486. The one necessary thing. A person must have one or the other, either a disposition which is easygoing by nature, or else a disposition eased by art and knowledge. 487. Passion for things. He who directs his passion to things, the sciences, the national good, cultural interests, the arts, takes much of the fire out of his passion for people, even when they represent those things, so as statesmen, philosophers, and artists represent their creations. 488. Calm in action. As a waterfall becomes slower and more floating as it plunges, so the great man of action will act with greater calm than could be expected from his violent desire before the deed. 489. Not too deep. People who comprehend a matter in all its depth seldom remain true to it forever, for they have brought its depths to the light, and then there is always much to see about it that is bad. 490. Idealists' delusion. All idealists imagine that the causes they serve are significantly better than the other causes in the world. They do not want to believe that if their cause is to flourish at all, it needs exactly the same foul-smelling manure that all other human undertakings require. 491. Self-observation. Man is very well defended against himself, against his own spying and sieges. Usually he is able to make out no more of himself than his outer fortifications. The actual stronghold is inaccessible to him, even invisible, unless friends and enemies turn traitor and lead him there by a secret path. 492. The right profession. Men seldom endure a profession if they do not believe or persuade themselves that it is basically more important than all others. Women do the same with their lovers. 493. Nobility of mind. To a great degree, nobility of mind consists of good nature and lack of distrust, and thus contains precisely that which acquisitive and successful people so like to treat with superiority and scorn. 494. Destination and paths. Many people are obstinate about the path once it is taken, few people about the destination. 495. The infuriating thing about an individual way of living. People are always angry at anyone who chooses very individual standards for his life. Because of the extraordinary treatment which that man grants to himself, they feel degraded, like ordinary beings. 496. Privilege of greatness. It is the privilege of greatness to grant supreme pleasure through trifling gifts. 497. Unwittingly noble. A man's behavior is unwittingly noble if he has grown accustomed never to want anything from men, and always to give to them. 498. Condition for being a hero. If a man wants to become a hero, the snake must first become a dragon, otherwise he is lacking his proper enemy. 499. Friend, shared joy, not compassion, makes a friend. 500. Using high and low tides. For the purpose of knowledge, one must know how to use that inner current that draws us to a thing, and then the one that, after a time, draws us away from it. 501. Delight in oneself. Delight in an enterprise, they say, but in truth it is delight in oneself by means of an enterprise. 502. The modest one. He who is modest with people shows his arrogance all the more with things, the city, state, society, epoch, or mankind. That is his revenge. 503. Envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy are the pudenda of the human soul. The comparison can perhaps be pursued further. 504. The most refined hypocrite. To speak about oneself not at all is a very refined form of hypocrisy. 505. Annoyance. Annoyance is a physical illness that is by no means ended simply by eliminating the cause of the annoyance. 506. Representatives of truth. The champions of truth are hardest to find, not when it is dangerous to tell it, but rather when it is boring. 507. More troublesome than enemies. When some reason, e.g. gratitude, obliges us to maintain the appearance of unqualified congeniality with people about whose own congenial behavior we are not entirely convinced, these people torment our imagination much more than do our enemies. 508. Out in nature. We like to be out in nature so much because it has no opinion about us. 509. Everyone superior in one thing. In civilized circumstances, everyone feels superior to everyone else in at least one way. This is the basis of the general goodwill. Inasmuch as everyone is someone who, under certain conditions, can be of help, and need therefore feel no shame in allowing himself to be helped. 510. Reasons for consolation. When someone dies, we usually need reasons to be consoled, not so much to soften the force of our pain, as to excuse the fact that we feel consoled so easily. 511. Loyal to their convictions. The man who has a lot to do usually keeps his general views and opinions almost unchanged, as does each person who works in the service of an idea. He will never test the idea itself anymore. He no longer has time for that. Indeed, it is contrary to his interest even to think it possible to discuss it. 512. Morality and quantity. One man's greater morality, in contrast to another's, often lies only in the fact that his goals are quantitatively larger. The other man is pulled down by occupying himself with small things in a narrow sphere. 513. Life as the product of life. However far man may extend himself with his knowledge, however objective he may appear to himself, ultimately he reaps nothing but his own biography. 514. Iron necessity. Over the course of history, men learn that iron necessity is neither iron nor necessary. 515. From experience. That something is irrational is no argument against its existence, but rather a condition for it. 516. Truth. No one dies of fatal truths nowadays. There are too many antidotes. 517. Basic insight. There is no pre-established harmony between the furthering of truth and the good of mankind. 518. Human lot. Whoever thinks more deeply knows that he is always wrong, whatever his acts and judgments. 519. Truth as circa. Error has turned animals into men. Might truth be capable of turning man into an animal again? 520. Danger of our culture. We belong to a time in which culture is in danger of being destroyed by the means of culture. 521. Greatness means to give a direction. No river is great and bounteous through itself alone, but rather because it takes up so many tributaries and carries them onwards. That makes it great. It is the same with all great minds. All that matters is that one man give the direction, which the many tributaries must then follow. It does not matter whether he is poorly or richly endowed in the beginning. 522. Weak conscience. Men who talk about their importance for mankind have a weak conscience about their common bourgeois honesty in keeping contracts or promises. 523. Wanting to be loved. The demand to be loved is the greatest kind of arrogance. 524. Contempt for people. The least ambiguous sign of a disdain for people is this, that one tolerates everyone else only as a means to his end, or not at all. 525. Disciples out of disagreement. Whoever has brought men to a state of rage against himself has always acquired a party in his favor, too. 526. Forgetting one's experiences. It is easy for a man who thinks a lot and objectively to forget his own experiences, but not the thoughts that were evoked by them. 527. Adhering to an opinion. One man adheres to an opinion because he prides himself on having come upon it by himself, another because he has learned it with effort, and is proud of having grasped it, thus both out of vanity. 528. Shunning the light. The good deed shuns the light as anxiously as the evil deed. The latter fears that, if it is known, pain, as punishment, will follow. The former fears that, if it is known, joy, that pure joy in oneself, which ceases as soon as it includes the satisfaction of one's vanity, will disappear. 529. The day's length. If a man has a great deal to put in them, a day will have 100 pockets. 530. Tyrant genius. If the soul stirs with an ungovernable desire to assert itself tyrannically, and the fire is continually maintained, then even a slight talent in politicians or artists gradually becomes an almost irresistible force of nature. 531. The life of the enemy. Whoever lives for the sake of combating an enemy has an interest in the enemy's staying alive. 532. More important. The unexplained, obscure matter is taken as more important than the explained, clear one. 533. Evaluating services rendered. We evaluate services someone renders us according to the value that person places on them, not according to the value they have for us. 534. Unhappiness. The distinction that lies in being unhappy, as if to feel happy were a sign of shallowness, lack of ambition, ordinariness, is so great that when someone says, "But how happy you must be," we usually protest. 535. Fantasy of fear. The fantasy of fear is that malevolent ape-like goblin which jumps onto man's back just when he already has the most to bear. 536. Value of insipid opponents. Sometimes we remain true to a cause only because its opponents will not stop being insipid. 537. Value of a profession. A profession makes us thoughtless. Therein lies its greatest blessing. For it is a bulwark behind which we are allowed to withdraw when qualms and worries of a general kind attack us. 538. Talent. The talent of some men appears slighter than it is, because they have always set themselves tasks that are too great. 539. Youth. The time of youth is disagreeable, for then it is not possible or not reasonable to be productive in any sense. 540. Goals too great. Who publicly sets himself great goals and later realizes privately that he is too weak to accomplish them, does not usually have enough strength to revoke those goals publicly either, and then inevitably becomes a hypocrite. 541. In the stream, strong currents draw many stones and bushes along with them. Strong minds, many stupid and muddled heads. 542. Danger of intellectual liberation. When a man tries earnestly to liberate his intellect, his passions and desires secretly hope to benefit from it also. 543. Embodiment of the spirit. When a man thinks much and cleverly, not only his face but also his body takes on a clever look. 544. Seeing poorly and hearing poorly. He who sees little always sees less. He who hears poorly always hears something more. 545. Self-enjoyment in vanity. The vain man wants not only to stand out but also to feel outstanding, and therefore rejects no means to deceive and outwit himself. Not the opinion of others, but his opinion of their opinion is what he cares about. 546. Vain by way of an exception. When he is physically ill, the man who is usually self-sufficient is vain by way of an exception, and responsive to fame and praise. In the proportion that he is losing himself, he must try to regain himself from the outside, using strangers' opinions. 547. The witty ones. The man who seeks wit has no wit. 548. Hint for party chiefs. If we can force people to declare themselves publicly for something, we have usually also brought them to the point of declaring themselves for it privately. They want to continue to be perceived as consistent. 549. Contempt. Man is more sensitive to contempt from others than to contempt from himself. 550. Rope of gratitude. There are slavish souls who carry their thanks for favors so far that they actually strangle themselves with the rope of gratitude. 551. Trick of the prophet. In order to predict the behavior of ordinary men, we must assume that they always expend the least possible amount of intellect to free themselves from a disagreeable situation. 552. The only human right. He who strays from tradition becomes a sacrifice to the extraordinary. He who remains in tradition is its slave. Destruction follows in any case. 553. Lower than the animal. When man howls with laughter, he surpasses all animals by his coarseness. 554. Superficial knowledge. He who speaks a bit of a foreign language has more delight in it than he who speaks it well. Pleasure goes along with superficial knowledge. 555. Dangerous helpfulness. There are people who want to make men's lives more difficult for no other reason than afterwards to offer them their prescriptions for making life easier, their Christianity, for example. 556. Industriousness and conscientiousness. Industriousness and conscientiousness are often antagonists, in that industriousness wants to take the fruits off the tree while it's still sour, but conscientiousness lets them hang too long until they drop off the tree and come to nothing. 557. Suspicion. People whom we cannot tolerate we try to make suspect. 558. Lacking in circumstances. Many men wait all their lives for the opportunity to be good in their way. 559. Want of friends. A want of friends points to envy or arrogance. Many a man owes his friends simply to the fortunate circumstance that he has no cause for envy. 560. Danger in multiplicity. With one talent the more, one often stands less secure than with one talent the less. as the table stands better on 3 legs than on 4. 561. Model for others. He who wants to set a good example must add a grain of foolishness to his virtue. Then others can imitate and, at the same time, rise above the one being imitated. Something which people love. 562. Being a target. Often, other people's vicious talk about us is not actually aimed at us, but expresses their annoyance or ill humor arising from quite different reasons. 563. Easily resigned. A man suffers little from unfulfilled wishes if he has trained his imagination to think of the past as hateful. 564. In danger. When we have just gotten out of the way of the vehicle, we are most in danger of being run over. 565. The role according to the voice. He who is forced to speak more loudly than is his habit, as in front of someone hard of hearing or before a large audience, generally exaggerates what he has to communicate. Some people become conspirators, malicious slanderers, or schemers, merely because their voice is best suited to a whisper. 566. Love and hatred. Love and hatred are not blind, but are blinded by the fire they themselves carry with them. 567. Made an enemy to one's advantage. Men who are unable to make their merit completely clear to the world seek to awaken an intense enmity towards themselves. Then they have the comfort of thinking that this stands between their merit and its recognition, and that other people assume the same thing, which is of great advantage to their own importance. 568. Confession. We forget our guilt when we have confessed it to another, but usually the other person does not forget it. 569. Self-sufficiency. The golden fleece of self-sufficiency protects against thrashings, but not against pinpricks.